In a kingdom where loyalty is measured in blood and silence, Sir Alaric of Dunwyn returns from war a hero, only to find that peace at home is far more dangerous than any battlefield. When whispers begin to rot the heart of his world, Alaric must confront not only the enemies outside the gate, but the shadows within it. In a land of honor and betrayal, what remains when the sword is finally sheathed? Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The bells of Dunwyn keep tolled with a slow, reverent rhythm, echoing across the frost-touched hills like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. From the high ramparts to the bustling lower market, the people of Arvelia gathered, their breath fogging in the crisp morning air, their eyes fixed on the cobbled road that wound its way toward the castle gates. At last they appeared, a procession of gleaming armor and battle-worn banners, hooves clattering like distant thunder. At the front rode Sir Alaric, the king's favored knight, his silver breastplate etched with the black falcon of House Dunwyn. His face, sharp and solemn beneath his steel half-helm, bore the weight of both recent battle and a man returning to a life he had not seen in months. Cheers rose like wind through the trees as Alaric dismounted. He nodded, not with pride, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen enough blood to value peace over glory. From the crowd emerged Lady Seraphine, her cloak trailing behind her like a river of wine. The sunlight struck her auburn hair as she approached, and the murmur of the people fell to silence. There was no need for grand gestures between them. Only the way her eyes found his across the space, how her fingers sought his gauntlet hand with aching familiarity. "You returned to me," she said softly, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "I would cross 10 kingdoms for the sound of your voice," Alaric replied, removing his glove to touch her cheek. "No crown nor sword could keep me." Behind them, the court watched with indulgent smiles. This was the tale everyone hoped for. The loyal knight, the noble lady, the promise of peace through love. Whispers of a royal engagement had already drifted through the corridors. But today, with the king's blessing, it was made known. Sir Alaric and Lady Seraphine would wed at the spring solstice. As the feast began that evening, the great hall blazed with torchlight and music. Yet Alaric, seated beside Seraphine beneath the royal banners, drank little and laughed less. The weight of war had not left him. Its shadow still lingered behind his eyes. Still, when Seraphine leaned into him and whispered, "We are safe now, my love," he allowed himself, just for a moment, to believe her. And in that fleeting moment, he was happy. Winter deepened its hold on Arvelia as snow laced the castle's high arches and coiled around its stone courtyards like silk spun by ghosts. Fires burned in every hearth, and yet the halls felt colder somehow. Less from the weather, and more from the silences that began to grow between Alaric and Seraphine. Alaric was not long at home. Trouble stirred again in the north. Raiders along the coastal cliffs, the usual winter wolves who tested the kingdom's edge when the snows made defense difficult. The king, ever trusting, had sent Alaric to deal with it swiftly. "You will return before the solstice," Seraphine said the morning he left, her hands gripping his cloak tighter than the wind ever could. "I swear it," he replied, pressing his forehead to hers. "Before the first spring flower breaks the earth, I will be at your side again." He rode out that day with 100 men, and the gates closed behind him with a heavy clang that echoed through Seraphine's bones. In Alaric's absence, court life wore on, dances, diplomatic visits, and the long, bitter quiet of days without purpose. Seraphine sat often by the tower window, staring northward, where the forests swallowed the roads beyond sight. She wasn't alone for long. Lord Cedric, Alaric's childhood friend, second only to him in the king's favor, remained behind to command the royal guard. His laughter returned to the hall more easily than Seraphine expected, and soon it lingered near her more often than not. He visited under innocent pretense. Updates on the border, news from the kitchens, a new verse written by the court bard. They spoke often, at first like kin, then with an ease that began to border on something else. She noticed his eyes stayed too long, and her replies weren't always brief. One afternoon, in the garden cloister where the roses had withered under snow, Cedric caught her hand after she stumbled. It was an innocent gesture, Truly it was. But he held it for a second too long, the frost-bitten silence around them suddenly thick. "My lady," he said, voice low, "you are too often left waiting." Seraphine pulled her hand back like it burned. "He is at war, Cedric. For us. For the king," he corrected. "Not for you." She turned away. But his words did not leave her. They lingered like smoke clinging to her cloak. That night, a maid found her in the solar, holding a letter from Alaric. It spoke of cold winds, loyal men, and his aching wish to return. But it was the second scroll that stirred unease. It had come from the stables, slipped to a servant boy by a cloaked courier. The seal was unmarked, the script unfamiliar. She read it once, twice, and then burned it in the hearth. Far in the north, Alaric sat beside a fire, sharpening his sword with rhythmic focus. The men laughed nearby, passing bread and wine. A falcon circled above, but he did not look up. He stared instead at the flames, as if they whispered to him. He had no proof. But something had shifted. And deep within, he felt it like a blade beneath the ribs, cold, quiet, and unseen. The snows had begun to thaw by the time Alaric returned from the north. The roads were soft with mud, and the trees dripped with the weight of their own melting frost. His company was smaller now. Many had stayed behind to hold the border forts. But the men who rode with him did so proudly, banners lifted high. Victory, after all, had been clean, swift. But Alaric's heart was not light. He had felt it each night by the fire, a restlessness, like he was being watched through the flames. And the letters from Seraphine, once flowing and bright, had grown shorter, more formal, as if written by a court scribe, not a lover. Still, he said nothing as the walls of Dunwyn rose into view, golden in the early spring sun. The castle gates opened, and Seraphine was waiting. She smiled as he dismounted, though the smile flickered too quickly from her eyes. He kissed her hand, not her lips. She said she had missed him, and he replied that he had thought of her every day, both statements true in their own way. Later that evening, as he settled into his chambers, a knock echoed from the door. It was Gareth, one of his squires, sharp-eyed, loyal, and young enough to still speak plainly. He handed Alaric a rolled scroll. "This was left among your belongings, my lord. It wasn't there when we departed." The scroll bore a dark red ribbon, no seal, no name. Alaric frowned, turning it in his hand. The script within was fine, slanted, and familiar. "I wait for the spring, not for you. Her eyes no longer seek the north. You were a fool to leave her." There was no signature. But the words, the rhythm of them, they stirred something. He had read Cedric's handwriting 1,000 times. He could see it now, the flourish on the S, the way the fool curled like a snake's tail. His breath stilled. He didn't react with fury. Alaric was a soldier, not a poet. Instead, he sat with the scroll for a long while, then folded it neatly, tucking it into the inner lining of his cloak. The rest of the night, he walked the keep in silence, corridors he knew by heart, now suddenly strange. The next morning, he found Cedric in the sparring yard, training with 2 guards. "You've grown slow," Alaric said with a faint smile. Cedric turned, laughing, wiping sweat from his brow. "You've been gone too long, old friend. You're starting to sound like a king's counselor." They embraced like brothers. But when Alaric clapped him on the back, his hand lingered too long, and his grip was just a little too firm. Later that day, Alaric entered Seraphine's solar unannounced. She was reading by the window, the light haloing her auburn hair. She looked up, startled. "There is a perfume in here I do not remember," he said evenly, his eyes scanning the room. "Perhaps the servants used too much lavender in the linens," she answered too quickly. He crossed the room slowly, until he stood behind her. "Has Cedric been keeping you company?" he asked. She paused only half a heartbeat too long. "When time allows, yes. As any friend might." "Of course," he said. He left before the silence grew heavy. That night, beneath a loose stone in the chapel's rear wall, a hiding place he'd used as a boy, he left the scroll. Folded once. Hidden deep. A test. And a warning. The great hall of Dunwyn was ablaze with light and song. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows behind the high banners of the realm. Goblets clinked, servants moved swiftly with roasted game and honeyed wine, and the court's laughter rang bright beneath the vaulted ceiling. It was a feast to honor the return of Sir Alaric, the kingdom's shield, the people's pride. But Alaric did not smile. He sat beside Lady Seraphine, who wore a gown of midnight blue, threaded with silver stars, a gift he had sent her from the northern markets. She looked every inch the noble bride-to-be. Her laughter was soft and practiced, her hand resting on the stem of her goblet as if it belonged there. Across the table, Lord Cedric entertained nobles with a tale of border skirmishes and drunken soldiers, his voice full of confidence, eyes glancing occasionally towards Seraphine. Alaric's hand rested on the scroll within his cloak. He rose. At once the music softened. Conversation stilled. All eyes turned to the knight who had spilled blood for the realm. "My lords, my ladies," he began, his voice calm but cold. "Forgive me if I do not toast tonight. There is a burden I cannot drink away." The air shifted. He stepped forward, pulling the scroll from his cloak, holding it aloft between two fingers. "This was found among my belongings. Anonymous. But its words were not born of rumor. They were born of knowledge. Intimate knowledge." Seraphine's fingers tightened around her cup. "I do not speak in riddles," Alaric continued. "I speak of betrayal. Not from an enemy, but from those I called my own. Those to whom I gave my trust. My love." Murmurs broke out among the court like the rising wind before a storm. "Lady Seraphine," he turned to her now, his voice like drawn steel, "I ask not for excuses, only for truth." She stood slowly, pale. Her eyes searched his for mercy but found none. "Yes," she said finally. A whisper, but the hall had fallen so still that even silence seemed to listen. A collective breath was drawn. "With Cedric?" Alaric asked, already knowing. Seraphine did not answer. She only bowed her head. Cedric stood sharply, his face flushed, his jaw tense. "Alaric, you've no right." "I gave you everything," Alaric said, the fury finally burning through. "I called you brother, and you buried your knife in my back with a kiss." The king, seated atop the dais, watched with narrowed eyes. He raised a hand. "Enough." Servants cleared the hall as nobles filed out in murmuring clumps. Cedric stepped forward, chest heaving. "It wasn't planned, Alaric. It happened. We never meant." "You meant to deceive me," Alaric spat. "That was enough." Seraphine looked to the king, her voice trembling. "I will go. To the convent at Caerwyn. Do not punish him for what I chose as well." Cedric turned to her, eyes wide. "Seraphine." But she would not meet his gaze. The king nodded, face carved from stone. "You shall go. Both of you have dishonored this court. You, Lady Seraphine, will atone in silence. And you, Lord Cedric." Cedric dropped to his knees. "You are stripped of title and land, exiled beyond the western river. You may live, but you shall not return." A silence hung like smoke in the hall. Only Alaric remained standing when it cleared, the scroll still in his hand, ashes in his chest. That night, he left his chamber without a word, rode from Dunwyn before dawn, and did not look back. Behind him, the keep slept, colder now, despite the coming spring. The road west was long and quiet. Alaric rode alone, his armor stowed in a weathered saddlebag, his sword sheathed but ever within reach. The great banners of House Dunwyn, once proudly displayed on his back, now sat folded in silence, their fabric dulled by dust and grief. He passed no cities, only small hamlets where farmers paused in their work to watch the stranger ride through. A tall man with a warrior's posture and a hunter's silence. He did not stay long in any place. No one recognized him. No one bowed. And for the first time in his life, Sir Alaric of Dunwyn was just a man. At night, he slept beneath trees, wrapped in a woolen cloak, his dreams thick with memories. Seraphine's voice haunted him most. Not her betrayal, but the tenderness that had once been real. The way she said his name in the dark. The way her fingers trembled the first time they touched his. The laughter they shared in the garden of the West Wing, when she'd pretended to be a maid and spilled ink on a visiting duke. He had loved her wholly, blindly, as a knight does, with the kind of faith that has no edges, no suspicion, no doubt. And now he had nothing. Weeks passed. The weather turned. Spring bloomed in the fields, and yet Alaric did not feel its warmth. He found shelter in a remote village nestled at the edge of the Eldon Moor, a forest so thick and ancient even the mapmakers left its center blank. The people were quiet folk, farmers, weavers, fishers, and they asked no questions when he offered to chop wood in exchange for food. He never gave them his name, only that he had lost someone. One evening, he stood at the river's edge, watching the moon shimmer over the current. His hands were rougher now, calloused not from sword hilts but from axe handles and coarse rope. He looked less like a knight, more like a ghost in flesh. That's when he met Melis. She came from the woods barefoot, a basket of herbs on her arm, her cloak smelling of pine smoke and crushed lavender. Her eyes were not gentle. They were fierce, discerning, the kind of gaze that saw through lies and silence alike. "You're not from here," she said, setting her basket down without invitation. "I am now," Alaric replied, not looking up. She crouched beside the river, rinsing stalks of fever root. "You've bled for something. Or someone. And you've not forgiven them." He turned, startled. "I know the look," she said simply. "I wore it for years." He said nothing. But for the first time in months, something inside him stirred. Not trust. Not hope. Just the faintest ember of curiosity. A voice that whispered, "Not all is lost." Time in the village did not pass by weeks or months, but by the rhythm of firewood and harvest, river thaw and frostbite. The world did not ask where Alaric had come from, only if he could carry weight, if his hands were steady, if his axe swung true. He said little, slept alone, took his meals at the edge of gatherings, and left before songs began. But Melis did not leave him be. She lived in a stone cottage built half into the earth, herbs drying from the rafters, books scattered across the table like spilled secrets. The villagers called her a healer, though some still muttered the word witch. Her touch worked where potions failed, and her voice carried the calm weight of someone who had endured storms without collapsing. One night, when the frost returned early and the air bit sharper than usual, Melis knocked on his door with a bowl of stew and a half-smile. Wood smoke and silence, a fine perfume, if you're trying to scare the wolves. Alaric looked at the bowl, then at her. "I have food." "Yes," she said, brushing past him into the room. "But it tastes like boiled sorrow." He let her stay. They didn't speak much at first, not of real things. She asked him to help gather birch bark or to carry fresh linens to the sick. He did so without complaint. She taught him to bind wounds, to crush herbs into poultices, to tell the difference between mushrooms that healed and those that killed. He never told her who he was. But she never asked. Melis knew the posture of men who had worn armor too long. She saw it in his shoulders, the way they coiled even in sleep, as if waiting for an enemy that no longer stood before him. One morning, he found her outside her home, kneeling in the garden, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers stained with soil. "They betrayed you," she said suddenly, not looking up. He froze. "You don't walk like a man who lost a battle," she continued. "You walk like one who lost his heart." Alaric turned to leave, but she stood and wiped her hands on her skirt. "You can keep running," she said softly. "Or you can bleed it out here, among the trees, where no one expects you to wear a crown of steel." He said nothing, but he didn't walk away. That night, he sat by her hearth, and for the first time in a year, he slept without dreaming of Seraphine. Not of her betrayal. Not of the tower window. Not of the scroll. Only the fire. And Melis, humming a song too old to have a name. The spring rains came heavy that year. They flooded the fields and turned paths to rivers, washing away even the memory of frost. The village stirred with life, lambs born, seeds sown, smoke curling from chimneys like threads tying the world to peace. Then the rider came. His horse was slick with mud and foam, sides heaving, eyes wild. The man himself barely clung to the saddle, blood running from a gash at his side, his cloak shredded, armor dented. He collapsed at the tavern's door. "Dunwin," he gasped. "Dunwin burns." Alaric heard the commotion from the forest trail and returned to find the village gathered, the rider laid out by Melis's fire. "They came from the sea," the man rasped. "Crimson sails. Iron-skinned soldiers. No herald, no terms. The eastern wall is gone. The king is dead. They hold the throne room." Alaric stood in the corner, silent, as the villagers murmured like dry leaves in the wind. "We were told the garrison would hold." The rider choked on the words. "But without command, without a banner, they scatter." Alaric didn't move. Not at first. But Melis turned to him. "You knew it would come again, didn't you?" she said, eyes sharp. "The world never stays quiet." He said nothing, only walked outside. The wind was colder now, and in it he heard the echoes of Dunwin's bells, not in reality but memory. He saw the ramparts, the feasts, the courtyards where he once trained with Cedric, the tower window where Seraphine stood in another life. That life was gone, but the people, they were still there. Innocents, squires, gardeners, bakers, children. He went to the barn, dusted off the chest he hadn't opened since he arrived. The steel inside had dulled, but it was still whole. His sword was wrapped in cloth, the black falcon of his house still etched in the hilt. He ran his hand over it like one might touch a scar. Melis found him just as he cinched the breastplate tight. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I do," he replied, voice quiet. "But not for them." Her gaze lingered. "For who, then?" "For those who never betrayed me." He mounted before dawn. The village gathered to watch him go. A man they had called no one, now armored in silence and resolve. A few murmured prayers. Melis simply handed him a satchel, herbs, salves, bandages, and a small blade beautifully forged. "Come back," she said, not with hope but with strength. Alaric gave one nod, then rode east, into a horizon painted with smoke. Behind him, the forest sighed. Ahead, Dunwyn called, not with honor, not with fanfare, but with need. Dunwyn rose from the hills like a wounded beast. Smoke coiled from shattered towers. The once proud eastern wall was breached, its stones scattered like the bones of giants. Crimson banners flew where the falcon once soared, and the gates hung half-broken, groaning in the wind. Alaric approached beneath the gray sky alone. No trumpet announced his arrival. No horns, no cheering masses. Only the sound of hooves on broken stone and the wind pushing ash across the ruined courtyard. The invaders, mercenaries from across the sea, had taken the keep not with numbers but with strategy. Poisoned grain. A bribe to the outer guard. Treachery. Always treachery. He dismounted just inside the gate, drawing his blade. Not to shine, not to pose, but because this time it would have to do the speaking. He moved like a ghost through the inner halls, dispatching sentries with swift, silent strikes. There was no glory in it. Only necessity. Only purpose. In the great hall, where he had once been honored, once betrayed, the new Lord of Dunwyn waited. Clad in blackened steel, a captain of the raiders stood over the throne like a carrion bird, flanked by brutes. Alaric stepped into the hall and threw the enemy a name, not a challenge. They fought. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was real, blood on marble, steel on steel, roars and cries echoing from stone walls that had heard laughter not so long ago. In the end, the black-helmed captain lay at Alaric's feet, his sword shattered, his body still. The invaders fled or surrendered before noon. The keep, battered and burned, stood under a bannerless sky. Alaric did not claim the throne. He walked its length slowly, remembering the night Seraphine confessed. The coldness in her voice. The hollowness in Cedric's eyes. In the far corner, a group of sisters emerged from the tower sanctuary, where they had hidden during the siege. Among them, veiled and silent, was Seraphine. She looked thinner, older, humbled. Their eyes met across the room. He did not speak, and neither did she. There was nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, Alaric returned to the village. Melis stood by the garden fence, a basket at her hip. She saw him coming and did not smile, but her eyes softened in the way spring sun softens frozen ground. He dismounted slowly. "You came back," she said, not as a question. "I said I would," he replied, handing her the satchel she had given him, the blade unused, the herbs nearly gone. "You still wear the armor," she said. "For now. And the sword." Alaric looked down at the weapon at his side. Then, in a single quiet motion, he removed it and set it on the porch. Not as an offering. Not as surrender. Just release. "Enough blood for one life," he said. She nodded once, then turned and walked into the house, leaving the door open behind her. Alaric followed. Inside, the fire was warm. Bread baked. There was a bed not made for war, and a chair not made for thrones. No banners. No crowns. Only peace. And in that quiet, Alaric finally laid down the weight of everything he had carried. Not with a sword, not with vengeance, but with the hardest thing of all. Forgiveness.